been emotional about it since then, since that time. And it's truly a gift for us to be here and for me to be here, so I just want to say thank you, first and foremost. Damien and I met recently, actually, as a result of mutual friends and our love of the art of tattooing. And I was invited to come down to a shop in New York City and get tattooed by Damien, which is pretty great. And it's right here, this little ass. And in the process of that experience and that meeting, we began talking and began sharing about trauma. And I am a survivor of murder in my family. My mother was murdered in 1983, and her killer was sentenced to death row. And we began to share about trauma and our experiences. As different as they were, there was a real connection and a real honest exchange that didn't feel pressured, that didn't feel awkward and uncomfortable. And that's how we became friends. And that's why I'm here now. And I have to first off start by saying again that this book, Life After Death, I am not a reader, as I told you backstage. I don't like it. I have ADD. I read a line and start thinking about something probably self-centered, and then come back to the page. And I couldn't put this book down. And before we get started here with the line of questioning, I just wanted to ask you, how did you become such a gifted, incredible writer?
Even before I answer that, I just want to say thank you to Dave for coming here and doing this tonight. This is scary as hell. But it does take a lot of the jitters out of it and a lot of the anxiety just having it here and easing that. So thank you for doing this. And thank you everybody for coming tonight. Really, in essence, the way I learned how to write, as crazy as it sounds, was by reading Stephen King novels. I started reading Stephen King when I was 10, 11 years old, and was immediately hooked. And when I was in prison, I would read them over and over and over. So much so that a lot of the characters in them started to feel like friends that you miss when the book ends. And when I read his writing, his stories, when you listen to music, you always hear a beat to the music. And you could pick up a pen and write a new song to the beat of the one you're hearing in your head. So that's what I did whenever I started writing. I would hear the beat that was in his books, and I would try to match that beat while I was writing. And even though, the stuff we write isn't even remotely similar, he writes fictional books about, monsters and the end of the world and things like that. And mine is, a non-fictional account of the things that have happened to me. I've still always tried to match that beat. And whenever I got out, one of the first things I did was I had self-published, or Margaret Cho had published a memoir when I was in prison of letters that she and I had been writing back and forth. And I looked up the reviews of that, what customers were saying online. And I read this woman had written this one and said, while I was reading this book, I kept having the nagging sensation that I read it somewhere, this voice. I'd heard this voice somewhere before. And about 3/4 of the way through the book, I realized it's Stephen King. And to me, that was like the highest compliment.
Yeah, there are moments in the book that were, for me, incredibly touching, of course, incredibly frustrating, incredibly sad, but of moments that I found humorous, just in terms of the way that your descriptive writing ability comes across. And I don't know if that's something that could be, emulated from, that's your voice. It's really an impressive work, and I just congratulate you so much on it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I didn't want it to be completely dark and morose and foreboding the whole time. I wanted it to be something that when people read it, they didn't come away from it completely traumatized. I wanted it to be something that, there was some sort of enjoyment. And so there were parts of it that even when I was writing about really horrific things, I would try to keep it really lighthearted.
yet it comes across in just trauma being a key word there. And your whole story really is an incredible story of hope, ultimately. And with that, let's get into some of the stories in the book and your experiences there. For instance, when you were born, can you talk a little bit about your upbringing and your childhood?
The family I came from is beyond dirt poor. When we did finally move up into a trailer park, to us that was really moving up in the world. We had electricity, we had running water. To us, that was a lap of luxury. I have a 9th grade education. I dropped out of school in 9th grade, and that's more than anyone else in my family has. My mother had me when she was 15 years old. My father was 16 years old. I don't believe I ever saw either one of them read a book. So we were like the epitome almost of a caricature of like the illiterate, poverty-stricken, white trash Southern family.
Talk a little bit about your maternal grandmother who raised you when you were very young and your memories of her.
When I was about 3 years old, my sister was born. And my mother felt like she couldn't raise me and my sister. She was still very young at that time. She would have only been 18 years old. And she felt like she couldn't handle 2 kids, so she gave me to my grandmother. So from a very early age, my grandmother was the maternal figure in my life. She was like my mother. I lived with her for most of my life. She died while I was in county jail waiting to go to trial. And whenever she died, it was like my family died, because I never really did have that strong connection with anyone else in my family. My father left when I was 7 years old. Didn't come back until I was 17. Even then, he only stayed a couple months. So my grandma was like all I had. And she could be unbalanced at times. A little off, a little trigger happy. Quick to drag the gun out of the closet. But at the same time, she was the source of stability and structure, everything else in my life.
I can see that even at those early years of feeling different and outside of the community at large, just based on circumstances alone.
Oh, absolutely. We didn't have money when I was growing up for things like the latest shoes or whatever it was the other kids were wearing or whatever video game it was they were playing. So it's really hard to fit in when you don't have anything in common with the people around you based on something as simple as your financial situation.
Sure. And in addition to that, you moved around so much.
Nonstop.
So fitting in was probably very difficult to do based on what you said and the fact that you weren't even anywhere for very long.
Yeah.
How did that affect you?
Sometimes we would only live in a place for like 2 weeks before we would move again. By the time I was 10 years old, I had already lived in Arkansas, Texas, Tennessee, Mississippi, Louisiana. We were constantly moving as a kid. And when you're only staying in a place for 2 weeks, there's no, real time to even meet other kids, much less form any sort of relationships or anything like that. So I never really had any close friends, in my early childhood development.
Now, your grandparents, Manny and her husband, Ivan, you talk a lot about them, particularly Ivan, some great stories about him as this Southern scoundrel. Tell us a little bit about Ivan.
Ivan was even though he wasn't my biological grandfather, he was the person that I knew as my grandfather, just because I was so young whenever my biological grandfather died. That Ivan was really all I ever knew. He was kind of crazy too, though, so he fit really well with my grandmother. And he would tell me these outrageous things sometimes that probably warped a little kid. And I can remember he used to go around and dig things out of people's garbage and fix it up in some sort of way and sell it at a flea market. He was a flea market vendor. And one time he got his hand on a giant box of tube socks somehow. So he was selling these tube socks at a flea market. And I'm sitting there with him, and the whole time I'm realizing, all these white socks. It was a black family. So I asked him, why is it only black people are buying the socks? And he said, because if their feet get cold, they'll die. And I was like, to me that was like a stunning revelation. I mean, what?
That's true.
I took it, I believed it 100% because his grandfather was telling me this. But to me it was a horrible thing. It was horrifying. But then it leads to other questions. I'm like, well, white people die too if their feet get cold? And he doesn't answer me. He just sits there staring at me, drinking his beer, smoking cigarettes. Like, I can't believe you're this stupid. But when I would tell guys about that in prison later, they would just stop for a minute and they're like, not only was your grandfather racist, he was fucked up.
That isn't your only experience with socks. In general, socks seem to be a recurring theme for you. Sitting in socks with your pajamas tucked into them, and what was the reason for that?
I don't know, but now that you mean, I didn't even think of that or realize that until you said it.
I'm reading the book.
It makes me think even now, Lori and I have discussions where there's a few things in my life I don't like people messing with, and one of them is my socks. So we have a rule, I've called her several times wearing my socks, and it's like, that's a rule, you don't wear them now.
Let's move into your experience in prison, if you would. You talk about prison being clearly an environment of cruelty, brutality. Tell us a little bit about some of the abuses that you've experienced and some of the other prisoners experienced, if you would.
Whenever I first, this started almost as soon as I got there, almost as soon as I walked in the door, the guards decided they were going to just welcome me to the neighborhood. So they took me to the part of the prison they call the hole. It's a completely dark, filthy cell in the back of the prison in complete isolation where they can do anything they want to you. And during the summer, it gets up to like 120 degrees in there. You can't breathe. It feels like somebody's sitting on your chest. And I'd come in at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, and chain me to the bars of the cell and beat me with nightsticks. And at one point, they had beaten me severely enough that I started to piss blood. Still to this day, I have a lot of kidney issues resulting from that. It went on for 18 straight days. They beat me, they starved me, they tortured me. And it was like it was nothing personal. It's just, welcome to the neighborhood. What happened is eventually word of what they were doing started to leak out into the rest of the prison. And this deacon from the Catholic Church heard about it. They used to come in and bring communion to the other inmates. And he went to the warden and he said, I know what you're doing. I know you're killing this guy. And if it doesn't stop, I'm going to go public. I'm going to start telling people about it. So they let me out, put me back in a normal prison cell. And other prisoners told me later they were, they all knew what was happening and expected to see me carried out in a body bag on a stretcher every day. And I think they probably would have, if not for that guy, if not for the prison realized that they were being watched. And it wasn't just me, it was everybody there. There was a guy, just one guy that had catatonic schizophrenia. And if you've ever seen anybody with that, sometimes they'll freeze in one position and not move for hours. The guards would make a game of it, and when this guy would freeze, they would slap him, kick him, punch him, just to see if they could make him move. Then it was nothing but a game. It was like this wasn't even a person, a human being. At the time that I got out of prison, the warden in our prison, he had been a guard at another prison, and beaten an inmate so bad he had lost an eye. And the local newspapers found out about it, wrote a few stories, and the prison administration said, well, we've got to get this guy out of here. He's bringing too much attention onto this prison. So instead of firing him, they promoted him to warden and sent him to my prison.
Wow. Is there any action that can be taken? You were released a little over a year ago, is that correct?
Right.
Were these kinds of things happening just as recently as that? Did you see all that stuff happening?
The physical violence wasn't happening that much towards the end. What started happening over time as technology progressed, they started putting cameras in the prisons. You know, when I first went in, there were no cameras anywhere in the prison system. And over the years, gradually they crept in. Even then, you know, they knew where the blind spots were and then get you there, but they couldn't just do it blatantly like out in the open like they used to. You know, used to they would beat somebody half to death in the hallway with 20 inmates sitting there watching. Who are they going to tell? Who's going to care?
On the outside, of course, we hear stories about prisoners receiving more cruelty based on crimes that involve children. Do you think any of that was directed at you because of the charges, or was it just a general abuse that was inflicted upon anybody that came in?
With the guards, it was a general abuse. Every single time I was in fear of losing my life in prison due to violence, it was always guards. Every single time. It was never another inmate. And maybe that would have been different if I was in, you know, just general population, if I was doing a 20-year sentence or something like that. But when you're on death row, it's like you have a common enemy. You know, you can't squabble and bicker amongst yourselves when the state is trying to kill you. You know, then that becomes divide and conquer. You know, you have to put up a sort of united front. So it doesn't really matter what you're there for on death row. People may not like you. You know, the guy in the next cell may not. It may hate your guts. But if it comes down to making a choice between staying with you or taking the side of the prison guard, he's going to take your side every time, just because he knows whatever they do to you, they can also do to him.
So is there more unity in death?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
The conditions, of course, at Varner's Super Maximum Security, Arkansas. Tell us a little bit about the conditions. You write that prisoners have been